Can a Montessori mom love Kumon? Here's what I discovered. As a Montessori guide, I believed that worksheets kill natural learning. Then I enrolled my son in Kumon, and now I'm seeing something that I never expected. When we moved our kids into an IB education here in Dubai, it felt like the perfect fit. That focus on creativity over grades, an emphasis on problem solving, global awareness, everything seemed perfectly aligned with our values. I especially loved that my kids' new school has a strict no homework policy during the primary years. Finally, right? Because if your child is at school for 7 hours a day and they can't teach them what they need to know in that time, then why are we even sending them there? Something must be seriously wrong if they need to send homework back in addition to those 7 hours. But I also knew, eventually, that my kids would need to get used to academic work outside of school. The secondary years are bound to bring homework, whether we like it or not. And what did I find right on the ground floor of our building? A Kumon center. So I thought, okay, why not give it a try? I made a deal with myself. We'd do a 1-month trial. Worst case, we'd prove that worksheets don't work and just move on with our lives. What I discovered wasn't that Kumon was good or bad, it's that I had been looking at learning completely wrong. By the end of this video, you'll see the 5 Montessori principles that I nearly overlooked, ones that I really did not expect to find in Kumon, and why starting with 3 plus 5, even though my son was already doing addition in the 4 digits, wasn't a step back, it was exactly what he needed. If you're a Montessori parent, you know this feeling. You've got the beautiful wooden materials, the carefully prepared environment, everything looks perfect. But then as soon as something comes along that involves worksheets or repetitive practice, you suddenly feel like you're going against everything that you believe in about learning. That's what I felt. When my son went for his initial Kumon assessment, he did brilliantly. But when they told me that he was going to be starting with single-digit addition worksheets, 3 plus 5, 6 plus 2, I was honestly a little bit offended because he was already doing 4-digit sums with the Montessori stamp game at home. My first thought was, they clearly don't know my son's potential. This is not going to work out. The teacher said something about the difference between knowing and mastering, but I just brushed it off. My son was doing way more advanced math than this. It took months of actually watching him work before I understood what she was getting at. As a Montessori trained guide, everything in me rebelled against Kumon. Daily worksheets, repetitive practice, this was everything Montessori education was supposed to not be about. The first month was especially rough. I had to keep reminding my son, do your Kumon, you forgot your Kumon. Papers were piling up on the dining table, he was seeing it as a chore, and I kept feeling like I'm betraying my own principles. But while I was focused on all of the surface level stuff, papers everywhere, daily reminders, the teacher was seeing something completely different. She made a comment to me that said, we don't look at whether he gets the right answer. We're looking at his patterns, his speed, where he hesitates, what kind of mistakes he's making. And she was completely right. Those sums that I thought he knew so well, he'd still pause on some of them, just for a split second, figuring it out step by step in his head instead of just knowing it. It wasn't automatic for him yet. Over the next few months, I noticed something interesting. Kumon wasn't just about worksheets. It was following 5 core Montessori principles that I'd never connected before. Let me show you what I mean. One of the core ideas that runs through all of the Montessori areas is this idea of progressing from simple to complex. It seems like common sense, but it's how we help children build real-life understanding of concepts. Whether it's in math, language, sensorial work, everything is arranged from simple to complex, from concrete to abstract. We're always moving from something that they can touch and feel to something that's more abstract. Take math operations, for example. We start with something really concrete, the golden beads, where children can actually see and manipulate what's happening when they add or they subtract. It's like a game. They're physically carrying hundreds and thousands. That's 100 square, that's 1,000 cube. They're physically carrying hundreds and thousands, watching the operations unfold right in front of them. Then we move on to the stamp game, which is a little bit less concrete. They're doing the same operations, but now they're working with small little tiles that are different colors for the different place values. They have numbers on them, but a square for 110 is the same size as the square for 100, which is the same size as the square for 1000. It's still concrete, it's still something that they can manipulate, but it's a level more abstract. And then beyond that, we move into representing them as a symbol. So instead of using 100 square, we now represent the number 100 with the numbers 100. And even within each material, the challenges are layered gradually. When doing additions with the golden beads, they'll start with simple sums with no carryovers. Then we introduce carrying in just one place value. Then carryovers in 2 place value. Each step builds on the last, but only when they've really understood the concept before. So when Kumon placed my son on basic single-digit addition, like 3 plus 5, 6 plus 2, I was honestly annoyed because he was already doing 4-digit multiplication with the stamp game at home. And I thought, why are we going backwards? But I soon realized that they're following that same simple to complex progression that I know so well from Montessori. They started him with single-digit additions, 1 plus 1 digit, then 2-digit plus 1 digit, then 2-digit plus 2 digits. First, they were without carryovers, and then with carryovers. Each step was carefully sequenced, just like we do it in Montessori. And it worked, because once he had those foundations solid, the complexity started to grow. Pretty quickly, actually. He moved from single-digit sums to multi-digit addition, and soon he was doing them all in his head without even writing the carryovers on paper. And the same progression happened with the other operations: subtraction, multiplication, division, even fraction. He's now doing operations with fractions. I never thought I'd see an 8-year-old boy doing 4-digit by 2-digit long division and doing most of it in his head. But because Kumon layered each step so gradually, he barely noticed how far he had come and how complex his work had become. That's the beauty of this simple to complex progression, right? It doesn't overwhelm them. It just meets the child where they are, and it builds from there, one gradual, tiny little step at a time. In Montessori, repetition isn't about rote learning or memorization. It's about helping a child move from having to think about something to just knowing it. There's this entire group of Montessori math work called Group 4 Memorization of Essential Combinations that's all about this. Children work through addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division facts, but they're using hands-on material. And then they later move on to more abstract manipulatives, but they keep repeating the same patterns until they don't have to think about them any longer. To learn more about how all of the different groups of Montessori math work flow together, from concrete materials to abstract thinking, there's a link in the description below to get a free Montessori math cheat sheet that breaks down the whole progression step by step. The goal is for the facts to become so familiar that the child can just recall them. And that frees up their brain far more than complex problem solving, because then they don't have to waste energy on the basics, because those are already so solid in their mind. It turns out Kumon builds fluency in almost the same way, through targeted, repeated practice that helps the child to internalize what they're learning. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. My son was getting the answers right. From the outside, it looked like he was just breezing through the work. But then his Kumon teacher pointed something out. She had been watching him during one of his sessions at the center, and she said he's doing really well, but there are a few number combinations where he pauses just slightly. She mentioned things like 6 plus 7 or 8 plus 7. He'd still get the right answer, but he was working it out in his head each time. It hadn't fully clicked into memory yet. And here's why that matters, right? Because at the base of every single math operation, whether it's 2 digits or 4 digits, you're still adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing these basic number combinations. So say, for example, if your child is adding 22 plus 9, they need to know 2 plus 9 without hesitation. That's 11. Then there's a carryover, so that becomes 2 10s and another 1 10. It sounds simple, but if they have to pause every time they do these simple additions, it causes mental friction that builds up and that slows them down. So what Kumon was doing was strengthening those foundations through these daily structured worksheets. Often a whole set of worksheets will cover just one operation, like adding 1, over and over and over in slightly different ways. So on that worksheet, he might be solving things like 3 plus 1, 9 plus 1, 14 plus 1, all in one page. Then maybe the next page moves on to plus 2, or it's a mix of both. And if he was still making mistakes, then that level would be repeated. There were weeks when his worksheets looked nearly identical to the ones from the week before, and I remember wondering, shouldn't he be progressing faster? But that's actually the mastery phase. It's not about just rushing through the levels. It's about giving his brain time to absorb, consolidate, and fully own that skill before he moves on to the next one. So much of that repetition that we talked about, the daily worksheets, the familiar sums, the review, all of that only works because it's based on observation. In both Montessori and Kumon, the adult isn't assigning work just for the sake of it. They're watching the child really closely. In Montessori, observation is one of the adult's most important responsibilities. We're there not to correct every little mistake or fill every silence. We're there to notice where they stumble, the patterns, the moments where the child is ready for more. And then based on that, we prepare what comes next. It's all based on what we saw. And I've always loved this approach in Montessori, but finding it in Kumon was unexpected. Twice a week, my son goes into the Kumon Center to do his worksheets there. And there's no one at the front teaching the group. The children just walk in, they sit down, and they get to work. Each of them at their own level, each at their own pace, on their own path. And the teacher just quietly moves through the room, and she's just simply observing. She's not directing, she's not teaching, she's just watching. And she only steps in when a child is stuck and asks for help. Otherwise, she's paying attention to the kind of things that you would only notice if you were really watching. Like where a child hesitates, which problems take a little bit longer, what kind of mistakes they keep repeating. And based on that observation, she adjusts their next batch of work. Now, the worksheets themselves do a lot of the work because they're structured to guide the child forward step by step, so they end up discovering the pattern, the shortcut, the rule, just from doing the worksheets. And that reminded me of how Montessori materials are designed to teach through use as well. When a child is shown how to work with a material and then is left to repeat it, over time the learning sinks in more deeply than if we had tried to explain it to that child. And that's what I was seeing at Kumon too. My son was learning by doing. The learning was happening in the doing. The adult stays close, observing, adjusting, supporting when needed, but the adult never rushes in. She just holds space for the child to work things out by themselves. When the environment is prepared well and the sequence is correct, the child doesn't need to be constantly taught. They just need someone to notice and to observe. And that is when the most meaningful learning happens because they're doing it themselves. In Montessori, one of the core beliefs is that every child moves at their own pace. There is no pressure to hit specific milestones by a certain age and to rush to keep up with anyone else's timeline. Instead, we watch the child closely. We notice when the child needs more time or when they're ready to move forward. And then we adjust the environment to support that. It's calm, it's child-led, and it really works. And that's what I was so surprised to find in Kumon. On the surface, it looks like just a bunch of worksheets, right? But underneath, it's actually built around individualized pacing. Children don't start based on their age or their school year. They start where they're at. And then from there, they move forward one small step at a time and only when they're ready. What really impressed me is how much they actually adjust things. Each child gets a specific number of worksheets to do every day. But that number isn't fixed. It changes depending on what they're working on, how they did the week before, how many mistakes they made, how fast they completed each set. So it's structured, yes, but there's room to adjust. And that's guided by what the child actually needs, not just what the worksheet says they should be doing next. The teacher tracks all of this really carefully. She watches patterns, she notices progress, she adjusts the difficulty and the pace based on the individual child, not the curriculum. And sometimes that means repeating a concept for a few more days. Other times it means jumping right ahead. And that's all based on readiness, just like it is in Montessori. My son wasn't being pushed or held back. He wasn't trying to keep up with classmates or zoom ahead. He was just learning, one step at a time. And because the pace was right for him, it wasn't too easy, it wasn't too difficult, he stayed engaged. When you get the pacing right for each child, learning becomes so much easier and effortless. Montessori taught me that principle. Kumon showed me what it looks like in practice somewhere else. One of the things I love most about Montessori is how much trust it places in the child. We don't push, we don't micromanage. We just prepare the environment and then we follow their lead. And when we do that, we see children step into their own learning rhythm. They start to own the process. And that's what happened in our home with Kumon. Now, I'll be honest, this part isn't necessarily built into the Kumon system. It's something that we brought in because of how we approach learning as a Montessori family. By the 4th month, I had stopped reminding my son entirely. He would just grab his worksheets and decide when to tackle them. Morning, evening, all at once, or bit by bit. It just became part of our daily rhythm, and it was not something that I had to chase him about. It stopped being a fight. It was just something he did because he knew he needed to get it done. That internal motivation, that sense of ownership is something that Montessori talks about all the time. And here it was showing up in how my son handled his Kumon work. He even started noticing the results. He could feel how much easier things got with practice, how concepts that once felt so challenging had started to feel automatic. And slowly it stopped feeling like a chore and started to actually feel satisfying. He might not jump out of bed bursting with excitement to do Kumon, but he does it. He gets it done and he's proud of it. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing Kumon and Montessori as mutually exclusive. In the beginning, everything in me resisted Kumon. Worksheets felt like the opposite of what I trained in, what I practiced as a Montessori guide. But when I started watching more closely, not just the worksheets, but how my son was responding to them, what I saw was so familiar. Repetition that built confidence, structure that supported independence, constant observation, work tailored to his needs. These weren't new ideas to me. They were exactly what I had always believed good education should be. These days, my son just grabs his worksheets and gets started with no reminders, no negotiations. It's become part of our rhythm. And honestly, when I step back and see how much he's grown in just 1 year, it's pretty remarkable. He's now doing mental multiplication with 4-digit numbers, division with 2-digit divisors. A year ago, I wouldn't have thought that that kind of math could feel so natural to an 8-year-old, but it does. And it's not because it was rushed or forced. It was built up slowly, layer by layer by layer, until it just felt like the next logical step. So yeah, Kumon looks different from Montessori on the surface. But once I paid attention to the principles behind it, it absolutely earned a place in our Montessori-inspired home. Not in spite of our values, but because of them. Now, I should mention something really important about timing. This worked so well for my son because he was 7 when we started, well into what Montessori calls the second plane of development. By the age of 6, children shift from hands-on sensory learners to intellectual learners who can work with abstract concepts. He had already internalized what numbers really mean through years of concrete materials, so worksheets made sense for building fluency. If you want to understand more about these developmental stages and how they shape learning, I've got a detailed guide to Montessori's 4 planes of development linked in the description below. It breaks down what each stage looks like and how to support your child through each one. If your child is under 6, so still in that first plane of development, I'd be a little bit more cautious because that stage is all about concrete experience. They need to hold, move, explore. My 5-year-old keeps asking me when she can start Kumon like her big brother, and maybe she will, but not yet. Now that you've seen how Kumon can actually align with Montessori principles through structure, independence, observation, you might be wondering how to bring those same values into your daily rhythm at home. You don't need perfect materials or a spotless shelf to create these meaningful Montessori moments. There are 5 simple ways that I sneak them into our busiest days without any pressure or overwhelm. Click here to see exactly how I built these natural learning opportunities using things that you already have around the house, so that you can nurture that same focus, that same confidence, even in the middle of everyday chaos. And tell me in the comments, which Montessori principles surprised you the most about Kumon? Because I love hearing how these connections land for you and how you're approaching learning with your child.